My name is Elena Harper. I'm 31 years old. 2 nights ago, my parents stood up at their 40th wedding anniversary dinner and decided to make me the punchline. There were 120 guests in the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers shimmered like falling stars. A live string quartet played something soft and elegant, the kind of music that makes people feel important. Champagne flowed. Laughter bounced off gold-trimmed walls. It was the kind of night built for legacy speeches and carefully curated memories. My father tapped his glass. That small sound sliced through the room. He stood tall under the spotlight, tuxedo perfectly fitted, silver hair brushed back like he was about to close a $1 million deal instead of deliver a toast. My mother stood beside him, graceful and glowing, her diamond necklace catching the light every time she turned her head. 40 years of marriage, he began, voice warm and controlled. 40 years of building something meaningful. Applause. He smiled toward my older brother seated near the stage, and a son who took over the company flawlessly, the future of our legacy. The applause grew louder, proud, confident. My brother nodded modestly, but I saw the satisfaction in his jawline tightening just slightly. He had always been the chosen successor, the reflection, the extension. I smiled too, because that's what I've always done. Then my father's eyes shifted. They landed on me. "Well," he chuckled, pausing just long enough to make sure everyone was listening, "not every investment gives returns." Laughter rippled through the room. It started light, uncertain, then stronger. My cheeks burned instantly. Heat crept up my neck like fire under my skin. I laughed too, a soft, controlled sound, because I thought it was just a joke, until my mother leaned gently toward the microphone. "Some children," she added sweetly, her voice dipped in honey, "choose unconventional paths." The word hung in the air. Unconventional. That was their polite word for disappointment. The laughter grew more confident now. Some guests looked at me openly, others pretended not to. I caught a cousin whispering behind her glass, an uncle shaking his head slightly as if this confirmed something he had always suspected. I stood near the back of the ballroom in a navy dress I had spent too long choosing, wondering if it was formal enough, if I was presentable enough, if I was enough. The violinists continued playing as if nothing had happened. The clinking of forks against porcelain resumed. The humiliation didn't stop the celebration. It blended into it. I felt something shift inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a door closing. Flashback. I'm 10 years old, holding a first-place science ribbon in our kitchen. My father glances at it and says, "That's good. Your brother made nationals." Flash. 16. I show my mother my art portfolio, restored paintings, delicate work bringing damaged pieces back to life. She flips through it, unimpressed. "That won't sustain you." Flash. 23. I decline a management role at the family firm. The silence at dinner that night had been colder than any insult. Back in the ballroom, the music swelled as my parents stepped down from the stage. Guests surrounded them instantly, offering congratulations, admiration, loyalty. Image was everything. Perception was power. And tonight, I had been publicly positioned as the flaw in their perfect portrait. My father approached me, champagne glass in hand. "You look tense," he said under his breath, smile still fixed for the crowd. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "Good, because tonight isn't about you." There it was. Not cruelty born from anger, cruelty born from certainty. Certainty that I would endure it. My mother touched my arm lightly, her nails pressing just enough to sting. "You're too sensitive, Elena. It was harmless." Harmless. I looked around the ballroom again, at the polished marble floors, at the towering floral arrangements, at the guests who saw only success and stability. They didn't see the cost of maintaining that image. They didn't see the quiet dismissals, the years of subtle comparisons, the way love was rationed according to obedience. Across the room, my brother avoided my gaze. He knew, but he would never challenge it, because the system worked. For him. The cake was rolled out then, a towering white structure with gold lettering, 40 years of legacy. Legacy. I stared at that word as applause thundered again. For years, I thought legacy meant belonging. Now I understood. Legacy meant control. My phone buzzed in my clutch, another message from a friend watching the live stream. That was cruel. I stared at the screen. Cruel. Yes, but calculated. Because humiliation in private can be denied, humiliation in public becomes narrative, and narratives shape reputations. I scanned the room slowly. Investors, board members, extended family, all witnesses, all now subtly aware of my position in the hierarchy, the underachiever, the creative liability, the investment that did not return dividends. My father caught my eye again from across the floor. There was something satisfied in his expression, not rage, not frustration, control. He believed he had re-established order. He believed I would retreat quietly into the background where I belonged. But something inside me had stopped shrinking. And when shrinking stops, space opens. Flashback again. 3 years ago, my small studio, dust particles floating in warm afternoon light. I stood alone in front of a centuries-old oil painting I had just restored for a private collector. When I finished, the collector had tears in his eyes. "You brought history back to life," he whispered. That was the first time I felt seen, not for potential, not for comparison, but for impact. And that impact had nothing to do with stock prices or corporate expansion. Back in the ballroom, my mother approached a group of women and laughed. "Elena's just exploring." Exploring, like I was on a gap year from adulthood. My stomach tightened. It wasn't the insult, it was the erasure. I stepped toward the balcony doors quietly, slipping into the cooler air outside. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass. Traffic lights blinked below like distant stars. Inside, applause swelled again. Outside, it was quiet. My reflection in the glass looked steady, older, stronger. I replayed the toast again in my head, not with hurt, but with clarity. He didn't just joke, he declared, he defined, publicly, and definitions have consequences. I realized then that this wasn't about one speech, it was about years of subtle conditioning, years of being measured against a mold I never agreed to fit. The calm inside me deepened. Not numbness, resolution. When I walked back into the ballroom, nothing had changed on the surface. Music, laughter, prestige. But internally, the axis had shifted, because calm meant decision, and decision meant movement. My brother finally approached me, lowering his voice. "You okay?" I studied his face carefully. "Are you?" I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. That hesitation told me everything. He felt it too, the imbalance, the performance, the pressure. But he would never challenge it, not while he benefited from it. I nodded once and stepped away. The night continued, but something had ended, and the terrifying realization settled fully into place. If they needed to diminish me publicly to maintain control, then maybe they were more fragile than they appeared. And fragile empires, they crack, quietly at first, then all at once. The cake was rolled out like a centerpiece trophy, 4 tiers, white fondant polished to perfection, gold lettering etched across the front, 40 years of legacy. The words shimmered under the chandelier light as if they carried weight, authority, history. Guests gathered again instinctively, cameras lifted, conversations softened into anticipatory murmurs. The string quartet shifted into something brighter, ceremonial. My mother adjusted her necklace and scanned the room with a poised smile. Then she found me. "Elena," she called gently, her tone sweet enough to disguise command. "Come stand with us." Several heads turned, eyes followed her gesture. I hesitated. My heels felt suddenly heavier against the marble floor. The air around me thickened with expectation. This wasn't an invitation, it was positioning. My father leaned in as I stepped closer, his cologne sharp and familiar. His smile remained fixed for the cameras, but his voice dropped low enough for only me to hear. "Try not to look miserable for once." The words landed softly, but they cut deep. Something shifted. The room blurred at the edges, like a lens losing focus. The violin music dulled into background noise. I could see my mother adjusting her posture for photographs. I could see guests raising their glasses, their phones ready. But everything felt distant. "Why do you do this?" I whispered, without looking at him. His jaw tightened slightly, though the smile never left his face. "Because you need to understand reality." Reality? He said it like it was a gift, like humiliation was education. The photographer waved us closer together. "Family shot," he called cheerfully. I felt my father's hand press lightly against my lower back, guiding me into position. My brother stood on the other side, rigid, his eyes forward. Perfect symmetry. I stared at the cake. 40 years. 40 years of marriage, of empire building, of careful image management. And in that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't about correcting me, it was about controlling the narrative. I stepped back instead of forward. It was subtle, just one small step, but it created space. "I do understand," I said softly. The cameras were still flashing. No one else heard me. "I understand perfectly." My father's smile faltered, just barely, a micro-expression, the kind only someone who has studied him for 31 years would notice. He sensed something slipping. The photographer laughed awkwardly. "Elena, come on in, we're ready." But I didn't move. The string quartet continued playing. Guests shifted uncomfortably. My mother's eyes flickered with irritation before smoothing back to charm. "Elena," she said through her teeth, still smiling, "don't embarrass us." Embarrass? The irony almost made me laugh. The ballroom felt smaller suddenly, warmer, like oxygen had thinned. Flashback. Age 12, family Christmas card photos. I had been crying earlier that day after losing a school debate. My father pulled me aside before the photographer clicked the shutter. "Fix your face," he said quietly. "No one needs to see weakness." Flash. 18, graduation dinner. I mentioned applying to art conservation programs abroad. My mother's fork paused mid-air. "Let's not announce dreams until they're realistic," she replied, smiling for the guests. Reality had always meant compliance. Tonight, something inside me refused. The applause started again as someone began singing a celebratory chant. My father raised a knife to cut the cake. My absence from the frame became more noticeable now. He glanced towards me again, irritation sharpening beneath his polished exterior. "Don't make a scene," he murmured. I looked around the room, at the investors laughing too loudly, at the relatives who measured worth in titles and dividends, at the enormous banner reading "Celebrating Legacy." And in that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. I had spent my entire life trying not to make a scene, trying not to disrupt their comfort, trying to prove my value quietly. But silence had never protected me. It had only enabled them. The photographer cleared his hand impatiently. "Are we ready?" My father's hand tightened slightly around the cake knife. I felt strangely calm, not angry, not trembling, calm. And that calmness scared me more than tears ever could, because calm meant decision, not dramatic, not loud, permanent. "I'm not part of this picture," I said quietly. The words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. My mother's eyes widened slightly, though she maintained her smile for the crowd. "What do you mean?" "I'm not part of this legacy," I clarified. The music faltered for half a second before resuming. The room's energy shifted, subtle but perceptible. My brother's gaze flicked towards me, then towards our father. "Now is not the time," he said under his breath, the steel finally visible beneath the velvet. "You're right," I replied calmly. "It's not." And that was the point. He had chosen this moment to diminish me publicly. I was choosing it to detach. Cause and effect. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "You're being emotional." "No, I'm being clear." There it was again, that tiny flicker in his expression. Not rage, fear. Because clarity is dangerous when control depends on confusion. The guests began whispering, phones slowly lowered. Something unscripted was happening, and they didn't know whether to capture it or pretend it wasn't unfolding. My mother leaned closer. "Elena, we can talk about this later." Later had been promised my entire life. Later never came. "I don't need later," I said softly. "I need distance." The word landed heavier than I expected. Distance, from comparison, from control, from constant evaluation. The string quartet stopped playing completely now. The silence felt enormous. My father finally dropped the smile. Not completely, but enough. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. The same words from years ago. Different moment, same strategy. Fear as leverage. But something inside me had shifted too far to return. "I don't think I will," I answered. I turned. Not dramatically, not storming, just turning away from the cake, from the cameras, from the curated portrait. Each step towards the ballroom exit felt deliberate, grounded. Behind me, I heard murmurs rising, my mother attempting to smooth the situation, my father clearing his throat, trying to re-anchor control. But the illusion had cracked, because once someone steps, cold night air hit my face like freedom. It was late, past 10. The city skyline glittered beyond the hotel's stone steps, glass towers reflecting streaks of traffic lights. A faint breeze tugged at the loose strands of my hair, cooling the heat that humiliation had left behind. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. Laughter echoed faintly from the rooftop bar above. Inside, the party continued. Outside, I could finally hear myself think. My phone buzzed instantly. The vibration felt sharp in the silence. "Mother, don't make a scene." Seconds later, "Father, stop being dramatic." I stared at the glowing screen. The words were familiar, predictable, almost rehearsed. For years, those phrases had worked like commands. They tightened something in my chest. They pulled me back into line. But tonight, for the first time, their words felt small. I let out a slow breath, watching it briefly fog in the cold air. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the entrance doors. Navy dress, steady eyes. No tears. I wasn't falling apart. That realization startled me. Flashback. Age 14. A school play. I had forgotten a single line during rehearsal. My father sat in the front row, arms crossed. "Control your emotions," he'd said afterward. "Weakness shows." I had cried in the bathroom stall that night, silently, so no one would hear. Tonight, I felt the same pressure, but it didn't break me. It clarified me. Another buzz. My brother this time. "Just come back inside. Dad's furious." Of course he was. He had lost control of the frame. I typed nothing in response. Instead, I stepped down the hotel stairs slowly, each step grounding me further from the ballroom's golden illusion. The pavement felt solid beneath my heels, real. A black car pulled up to the curb, headlights briefly washing over me before shifting away. The driver stepped out to open a door for another guest. Laughter spilled onto the street and disappeared again as the doors closed. Two worlds. Inside, applause. Outside, possibility. I opened my social media app. My parents' anniversary live stream was already clipped into short highlight reels. The toast, the laughter, my father's smile, my mother's poised commentary. I watched the moment again. Well, not every investment gives returns. The comment section was filling quickly. Some laughing emojis, some confusion, some uncomfortable reactions. The narrative hadn't fully formed yet. That was the dangerous part. Narratives move fast in public. My thumb hovered over the post button. I had years of context I could share, years of moments that painted a fuller picture. Conversations, emails, financial records I'd stumbled upon once while briefly consulting for the company. But I paused. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And truth required timing. If I acted impulsively, I would confirm their version of me, emotional, unstable, dramatic. If I acted strategically, I could shift the entire story. The hotel doors opened behind me suddenly. I stiffened, half expecting my father's voice to cut through the night. But it was just a group of guests stepping outside for air, laughing too loudly. One of them recognized me and offered an awkward smile. "Hey," she said carefully. "Great party, right?" I held her gaze for a second. "Beautiful," I replied calmly. She nodded quickly and turned away. People don't know what to do with tension when it's quiet. I walked toward the edge of the sidewalk, staring at the traffic moving below. Red brake lights blinked like a pulse, steady, rhythmic. My phone buzzed again. "Father, you're embarrassing yourself." I almost laughed. Embarrassing myself? The irony felt almost surreal. For years, I had protected their image, smiled through comparisons, avoided conflict at holidays, downplayed my own success to avoid threatening theirs. And tonight, for the first time, I had simply stepped out of frame. That alone had unsettled them. Cause and effect. They humiliated me publicly. I removed myself publicly. Power shifts often begin with something small. I scrolled further through social media. A few comments now questioned the investment joke. That seemed harsh. Was he serious? Yikes. Narrative forming. Slowly. I felt a strange mix of emotions rising. Anger, yes, but also something steadier. Relief. Because the moment I stepped outside, something invisible snapped. The leash. The expectation. The need for their validation. I sat on a cold stone bench near the entrance, folding my hands in my lap. The night carried a faint scent of rain, even though the sky was clear. Somewhere behind the hotel, a service door slammed shut. I imagined my parents inside, recovering the atmosphere, redirecting attention, cutting the cake without me. I imagined the whispers, the speculation, the subtle cracks forming in their polished evening. And for a second, fear crept in. What if I had miscalculated? What if walking away cost me everything? But then another thought followed immediately. What exactly was I losing? Approval? Inheritance? Access? None of those had ever truly been mine. Another message appeared. Unknown number. If you ever want to talk about what happened tonight, call me. A journalist. Interesting. I locked the screen slowly. Timing. Everything depended on timing. The night air felt colder now, but not hostile, just honest. Inside that ballroom, perception was curated. Out here, nothing was filtered. I stood up again, smoothing my dress. My reflection in a nearby car window looked different than it had an hour ago. Not hurt, not fragile, focused. I took one last glance at the glowing windows of the hotel ballroom above. Shadows moved behind the curtains. Applause flared again faintly, but it sounded distant, smaller, and I realized something quietly powerful. They thought I walked out in weakness. They thought I left because I couldn't handle reality. But the truth, I left because I finally saw it. And once you see the truth clearly, you can't pretend not to. My phone vibrated one more time. Mother, we'll discuss this tomorrow. I smiled slightly. No,
Tomorrow would be different, because tonight wasn't the end of a scene. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and this time I would choose when the world heard my voice. The night air felt heavier than usual. A single street lamp flickered above me, buzzing faintly, as if even the electricity was unsure about staying alive. The city had long since gone quiet, offices dark, windows empty, glass towers reflecting nothing but their own hollow silhouettes. And yet their buildings still glowed. The company logo, my father's pride, shimmered 20 floors above the pavement, clean, untouchable, respected. A symbol of success. A lie. My phone vibrated in my hand. The screen illuminated my face in pale blue light. Please don't do anything stupid. My brother. I stared at the message longer than necessary. Stupid? A slow breath escaped me. No, not stupid. Calculated. Years ago, before the public awards, before the interviews, before the philanthropic speeches, I briefly worked inside that building, fresh out of university, eager, loyal, proud to be part of the family legacy. I remember the first morning clearly, the smell of polished marble floors, the quiet hum of central air conditioning, assistants moving like well-trained shadows, my father's handshake, firm, rehearsed. You'll learn how real business works. I did, just not in the way he expected. It started small. Irregular transfers, minor discrepancies between internal ledgers and reported statements, numbers that didn't align unless you squinted hard enough to believe them. At first, I thought I was wrong. Then I stopped thinking and started digging. Hidden accounts routed through subsidiaries, strategic adjustments that conveniently balanced losses before quarterly reports. Money moved quietly, like a body buried where no one would think to search. I remember the exact moment I confronted him. His office was too large, too clean, the kind of room designed to make you feel smaller before you even spoke. I laid the documents on his desk. He didn't even glance at them for long. "You don't understand business," he said calmly, dismissive, controlled. But I saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the microsecond of recognition. He knew I understood. That day, something shifted, not loudly, but permanently. I stopped being his daughter and became a liability. I left the company soon after. Publicly, it was creative differences. Privately, it was exile. And yet, before walking out the last time, I did one thing. I kept copies. Not for revenge, but for protection. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the polished suits and family dinners and staged photographs,
My phone vibrated again, this time a call. My brother. I declined it. A second later, another text appeared. "They're scared." I almost laughed. Scared? Of what? Of exposure? Of prison? Or of losing control? I began walking toward the building, each step deliberate. My heels echoed against the pavement, sharp, rhythmic, certain. Memories overlapped with the present. Late nights in accounting rooms, coffee gone cold, screens glowing with spreadsheets no one expected me to question. I remembered copying files onto an encrypted drive, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from clarity. I knew someday this would matter. I just didn't know it would be tonight. Inside the tower, shadows moved behind illuminated windows, executives lingering after celebration, damage control meetings already beginning, because despite their performance, they knew something felt off. I wasn't responding publicly. I wasn't defending myself. And that terrified them. Silence can be louder than screaming. My phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. "We need to talk, now." Ah, not so untouchable after all. I stopped beneath the glass doors of the building. My reflection stared back at me. Calm, composed, unbroken. They tried to ruin my reputation, but reputation is smoke. Evidence is fire. A flash of memory hit me unexpectedly. My father teaching me chess when I was 10. Never attack without seeing the entire board, he'd say. He taught me strategy. He taught me patience. He taught me to think 3 moves ahead. What he forgot was that I was watching him play all along. The building doors opened suddenly. My brother stepped out. Tie loosened, jacket unbuttoned, confidence fractured. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. The city noise faded to a nothing. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. His voice wasn't angry, it was afraid. I tilted my head slightly. "Do what?" "Whatever you're planning." Planning. Interesting word. I'm not planning anything. I'm responding. His jaw tightened. "They'll destroy you." I held his gaze. They already tried. A silence stretched between us, thick with shared childhood memories, broken trust, and unspoken regret. "You kept something, didn't you?" he asked. There it was, confirmation. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The flickering street lamp above us buzzed louder, then steadied, casting harsh light across his face. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered. "You don't understand what this will do," he whispered. "Oh," I said softly, "I understand perfectly. Because this was never about money, it was about control, about narrative, about who gets to write history. They believed they controlled the story, but they forgot something critical. I was there. I saw everything, and I documented it." My phone lit up once more. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a notification. Encrypted files successfully uploaded, timestamped, distributed, irreversible. I watched my brother's face carefully as his own phone buzzed seconds later, then again, and again. Board members, legal advisors, investors. Panic spreads faster than truth. His eyes widened slightly. "You didn't." I met his gaze, measured, steady. "I told you, nothing stupid, just calculated." High above us, lights began turning off floor by floor, not in celebration, but in crisis. The empire built on image had just met reality, and as sirens wailed faintly somewhere in the distance, growing louder with every passing second, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not revenge, relief. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't running, I wasn't defending, I wasn't begging to be believed. The truth was speaking for itself, and it was loud. My brother stepped back slowly, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You planned this," he breathed. "No," I corrected gently. "They planned it when they chose to lie." The flickering street lamp flickered one last time, then steadied, and in that unwavering light, I realized something profound. They built their empire on illusion, but I built my defense on truth, and truth doesn't flicker. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles pale under the streetlight. The dashboard glowed faintly, casting a cold reflection across my eyes. Heart pounding like distant thunder, not from the exercise, not from fear, but from the weight of decisions that had been decades in the making. The night was quiet, almost eerily so. A single car passed, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Somewhere far away, a train clanged against metal rails, a reminder that life kept moving even when yours paused. Steam rose from a nearby manhole, curling upward like a ghost from a forgotten place. This wasn't just about humiliation, not tonight, not after everything. It was about decades of control, manipulation wrapped in silk, smiles and dinner parties where I had always been the perfect daughter in public, the scapegoat in private. I glanced at the hotel across the street, golden lights spilling through towering windows. My parents, my brother, standing tall, appearing untouchable, untouchable to the world, untouchable until tonight. If I exposed them, It would destroy everything: their reputation, their carefully crafted empire, their perfect image. Every accolade, every press release, every nod of approval would crumble in seconds. If I stayed silent, I'd destroy myself. Every memory of my childhood, every suffocating lesson in obedience, every subtle humiliation that had been passed off as guidance would consume me from the inside. The moral weight pressed against my chest, like someone was physically holding me down, pressing the truth into my lungs, squeezing out hesitation, leaving only choice. I touched the windshield. My reflection stared back at me, unfamiliar, stronger, sharper. Eyes that had seen betrayal, eyes that had been ignored, eyes that had quietly taken note. This was not the scared child who had once shrunk under their gaze. This was someone who had learned patience, strategy, and, most importantly, observation. I whispered, barely audible over the hum of the idling engine, "What do you want?" Not revenge, not spectacle, freedom. The word hung in the air, heavy, palpable, a mantra, a goal, a release. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop, its surface cold beneath my fingertips. Keys familiar, yet this night they felt sacred. I opened it. The glow filled the car, illuminating the lines of my face. Determination, focus, a plan forming one sentence at a time. I began drafting an email, every word chosen carefully, not emotional, not accusatory, each sentence a scalpel, precise, exposing truth without theatrics. The files I had saved years ago, records of hidden transfers, financial anomalies, email chains, and internal memos were attached, time-stamped, encrypted, safe, unalterable. Flashback. Late nights in the corporate office, my father's voice echoing behind the glass walls, my mother gliding past in heels, watching, judging, always measuring. I had been cautious, observant, recording every misstep, every secret transaction, not for revenge then, just in case the world demanded proof, in case someone else's lies threatened to define me. Back in the car, I paused, my fingers hovered over the trackpad, my chest tightened, heartbeat loud in my ears. A gust of wind rattled the windshield, a car alarm shrieked in the distance. The city was alive, indifferent to the personal storm I was about to unleash. I typed, subject, urgent, financial irregularities documented. The opening line was simple, professional, factual, not emotional, not accusatory, just truth, precise, irrefutable. I attached the files, every detail accounted for, every timestamp verified, every document a brick in the wall separating me from their control. I paused. My finger hovered over the trackpad. My chest tightened, heartbeat loud in my ears. Then I thought of the alternative, staying silent, pretending everything was normal, living under the weight of their control forever, my autonomy traded for comfort, my dignity mortgaged for convenience. No, not tonight. I clicked send. The laptop hummed as the email departed. Encrypted copies spread securely, reaching journalists, investors, and regulatory authorities. Immutable, timed, strategic, calculated. The city lights reflected on the laptop screen. I stared at my reflection again, different than before, unstoppable almost, but not reckless, every move deliberate, every outcome considered. The anniversary photos were already everywhere. My parents smiling, champagne raised, perfectly polished smiles. The public adored them, their empire, their image, untarnished, or so it seemed. And then a new post appeared, mine. It wasn't emotional, not messy, not dramatic. There were no long diatribes or sensational claims, just facts, precise, irrefutable. Documents attached, screenshots of financial statements, annotated discrepancies, dates, numbers, transactions. Creative accounting that stretched the truth, masked under layers of corporate jargon. I captioned it simply, "Transparency Matters." The post went live. I sat back and inhaled slowly, letting the weight of it sink in. Within minutes, comments exploded. Hundreds, then thousands. Shocking. Finally, someone speaks the truth. Is this real? Journalists began calling immediately. Emails from news outlets flooded my inbox. Requests for interviews, requests for verification, requests for comment. Investors demanded statements. I watched the panic unfold in real time. Screenshots of the post circulated in private chats at their company, Slack channels buzzing, lawyers dialing frantic numbers, executives whispering in office hallways. A pristine office, usually humming with controlled efficiency, now vibrating with uncertainty. My father's name was on my screen next. I hesitated before answering, my thumb hovered, and then I swiped. For the first time in my life, his voice shook. "What have you done?" The words were sharp but unsteady. His authority, always a mask, cracked. "I told the truth," I replied calmly. There was a pause. Silence stretched long enough that I could hear the faint hum of his office air conditioning. The way it hummed now, I realized, was different. Mechanical tension echoing human unease. Then he spoke again. A threat, or at least he tried. "You'll regret this." I almost smiled. The threat sounded hollow, empty, a weapon without force. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Not of him, not of their empire, not of the polished narratives that had ruled my childhood. I remembered the anniversary dinner, the laughter that cut me through like knives, the whispers, the pointed glances, and yet I had survived. Not just survived, I had outwitted. I had waited, patiently, meticulously, until the moment was right. I glanced at the social media post again. The engagement numbers climbed exponentially, news outlets reporting, corporate statements being drafted in haste. My parents' empire, gleaming, intouchable, immaculate, cracked beneath its own weight. Flashback. A year ago, I had quietly collected evidence. Emails flagged, transactions copied, screenshots hidden in encrypted drives, every discrepancy documented, every decision traceable. Not for revenge, not for spectacle, for survival, for truth. Because deep down, I knew the empire was a house of cards, and patience was the wind that would blow it down. Back in the present, the city outside continued its indifferent pace. Birds chirping, trains roaring, people walking dogs, life going on. And yet, I felt the gravity of what had begun, a cascade of events I could control if only I kept my calm. Another phone buzz. My brother. I ignored it. He didn't understand yet. He thought it was emotional, reckless, but I had prepared every step, every detail accounted for, every outcome anticipated. I remembered my father teaching me chess when I was 12. He said, "Always think 3 moves ahead," his eyes glinting with challenge. At the time, I had hated it. Now, I thanked him silently. Every strategic thought, every calculated risk led to this moment. A knock at my apartment door startled me. I didn't move immediately. My reflection in the darkened glass of the window looked tense but unbroken. I opened the door a crack. A journalist from a reputable outlet stood there, press badge gleaming, camera slung over a shoulder. "Ms. Dixon," he said quickly, voice low, "are these documents authentic?" I nodded, letting the weight of truth speak before I did. "Yes." His eyes widened slightly, then darted toward the laptop on the table. I watched him take out his phone, snapping images of the evidence. The news cycle had begun. Flashback. My mother's lips tightening as I mentioned leaving the company, my father's cold dismissal, the whispered threats I had learned to ignore, every humiliating dinner, every birthday ruined by silent judgment, every moment had trained me, prepared me, hardened me. Back in the apartment, I leaned against the counter. My phone buzzed again, another call from my father. Hesitation, uncertainty. For the first time, he sounded human, vulnerable. "Wendy, you've gone too far," he said softly, not angry, not commanding, vulnerable, fragile. I exhaled slowly. I've done what's right, my voice even, calm, unwavering. "You tried to destroy me for decades. Now the world can see the truth." Another pause. "I never thought—" he began but trailed off. There was no finish to the sentence. Defeat hung in the air, heavy, tangible. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, approaching from blocks away. Something about the sound punctuated the shift in reality. This was bigger than family, bigger than legacy. This was exposure, accountability, consequence. I opened the blinds fully and let the sunlight pour in. The city reflected on the laptop screen, numbers, dates, evidence, immutable proof of truth. Every keystroke, every decision, every careful move had led to this moment. I sent another email, another round of evidence to regulatory authorities. Timing precise, impact maximum, every recipient strategically chosen. The web of accountability had begun to entangle them. I thought of my childhood again. The dinners, the whispers, the disappointments masquerading as guidance. Every slight, every manipulation, every subtle humiliation, it all had a purpose now. Not for vengeance, for justice, for liberation. My phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. Message. "We're watching. Be careful." I smiled faintly, calm, collected, unshaken. I've been careful for decades, I thought. Now it's your turn. The city outside pulsed with life, unaware of the upheaval beginning in boardrooms, offices, and living rooms. My parents' empire trembled. Investors panicked. Journalists buzzed. Truth spread like wildfire. And I sat back in my chair, letting the glow of the laptop illuminate my face, not with triumph, not with malice, but with peace. For the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid. Because the truth had finally found its voice, and I was its messenger. The storm had begun, and I was ready. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly. Headlines scrolled across screens. Corporate scandal exposed by insider. Family empire under investigation. Financial irregularities uncovered. Notifications pinged relentlessly. My phone vibrated on the table, glowing like a warning light in the dark apartment. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened, indifferent to the chaos I had set in motion. Board members, who once nodded politely to my parents' every word, were now on high alert. Calls flooded their phones, emergency meetings convened in minutes, emails were sent, encrypted and urgent. A fortress of control, once impregnable, now cracked under the weight of truth. I heard a knock at my door, sudden and insistent. My heart jumped. Not fear, but anticipation. I wasn't alone in this moment. When I opened it, my brother stood there, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense, eyes darkened with something I hadn't seen in years, doubt. The arrogance he often carried like armor was gone. His gaze searched mine, searching for justification, for understanding, for some explanation that would make this all make sense. "You've destroyed us," he said, pacing the narrow apartment space. His voice quivered slightly, though he tried to mask it with volume. "Dad's under audit. Mom hasn't left her room. Investors are panicking. The company, it's in chaos." I watched him, noting the subtle tremor in his jaw, the way his hands clutched the hem of his shirt. Rage, worry, confusion, all layered and visible. He was their son, their reflection, and yet now he was human, fragile, uncertain. "No," I replied calmly, letting my voice carry calm where his carried storm. "I didn't destroy anything. I exposed what was already broken." He stopped pacing, staring at me with wide eyes. Doubt lingered there, unfamiliar, unspoken, yet heavy in the room. The arrogance he once worn like a badge melted away. He looked at me differently then, not with superiority, not with judgment, but with the subtle acknowledgement that perhaps, for the first time, I was right. He sank on the couch, running his hands through his hair. Silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the window, the distant wail of a siren, footsteps echoing on the street below, cars rolling past, life continuing while hours shifted irreversibly. My father's jaw tightened, a subtle movement that spoke volumes, a flicker of pride, a hint of stubbornness, and the first real acknowledgement of respect, all intertwined in that single gesture. His fingers clenched briefly, then relaxed. The tension in his shoulders slowly eased, though the stoic mask never fully returned. And then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded, just barely, not forgiveness, not surrender, not dominance, just recognition, a silent agreement that the old rules no longer applied, that power could no longer be measured by intimidation alone. That shift, tiny, almost invisible, changed everything. My mother exhaled slowly, a sound that carried relief, regret, and weariness all at once. She met my gaze, eyes glimmering with a vulnerability I had never seen in my life. "We underestimated you," she admitted quietly. The words were simple but heavy with the weight of years of assumptions, dismissals, and attempts at control. I let a small, almost imperceptible smile brush my lips. Not triumph, not gloating, just acknowledgement, validation, finally truth spoken face to face. Flashback. A memory pierced my mind. The science fair at age 10, the first time my ideas were dismissed in favor of my brother's achievements, the quiet discouragement of my parents, masked as advice, the subtle, consistent pattern of undervaluation and control. It all led here, not to revenge, not to chaos, but to equilibrium. The power balance had shifted, not by force, but by integrity. Back in the conference room, the hum of the air conditioning and the faint city sounds outside seemed distant now. Time itself had slowed. Every detail became amplified. The soft scratch of my pen as I idly tapped it against the table, the faint rustle of papers in front of my father, the gentle adjustment of my mother's pearls. Each gesture, subtle, yet meaningful. "I see now," my father said, finally, voice low but steady. "You were prepared for everything we never taught you." I nodded. I didn't need to elaborate. The evidence, the months of careful planning, the meticulous attention to detail, all spoke louder than words ever could. We sat in quiet for a moment, letting the understanding sink in. Not forgiveness, not peace, not reconciliation in the traditional sense, but clarity, a shared recognition that the dynamics had changed, that control, once absolute, could no longer dominate, that respect, earned rather than demanded, now had a seat at the table. I watched them both, noting subtle signs of shift. My mother's shoulders relaxed slightly. My father's gaze softened. The air between us, once sharp with tension, now carried a fragile possibility of collaboration, of dialogue, of moving forward differently. "You've grown," my mother said softly, not proud, not accusatory, observational, a statement of fact. And in that statement I sensed a truce forming, not a surrender, not reconciliation, but understanding of boundaries, of autonomy, of consequence. Flashback. I remembered the long hours compiling evidence, documenting irregularities, preserving facts. I remembered the nights spent questioning morality, strategy, and justice, the careful balance of courage and patience, knowing the moment of truth would arrive. This was it, this quiet, unannounced, uncelebrated confrontation, the culmination of years of preparation. Back in the room, I shifted in my seat, letting the stillness stretch. I didn't rush to speak. I didn't need to. The power of truth was already palpable, radiating across the polished oak table and glass walls.
I hope that moving forward, we act differently, honestly, openly, without fear of judgment, without shadows to hide behind. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. My mother's hands rested quietly in their lap, both silent, both listening, and I knew they understood. The moment lingered, delicate, powerful, fragile, a quiet reckoning. Not victory, not defeat, but awareness. Accountability had arrived, and with it the chance for something entirely new. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the transformation inside the glass walls above. Inside, 3 humans sat together, flawed, human, vulnerable, yet stronger for having faced truth. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a beginning, and beginnings, after storms of deception, humiliation, and control, were rare and precious. And for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. Not the old empire, not the old expectations, something new, something grounded in honesty, integrity, and respect. The shift had occurred, subtle, nearly invisible, yet undeniable, and that shift, tiny, human, real, changed everything. The future awaited, quiet, uncertain, but promising. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. A fragile, luminous hope ready to grow. The private reckoning had ended. The real journey, together, differently, consciously, was just beginning. Months passed. The corporate world moved like clockwork, rigid, precise, and unrelenting, but the ripple I had created refused to fade. Within weeks, the company underwent a quiet yet seismic restructuring. Departments that once operated under shadowy silos were now transparent, meticulously audited. New oversight committees were introduced. Compliance officers, analysts, and independent auditors scrutinized every ledger, every transfer, every financial nuance. The invisible architecture of control my parents had built for decades began to fracture under light they could no longer conceal. It wasn't immediate. Change rarely is. Public trust, once eroded, had to be rebuilt piece by piece. Press releases were drafted carefully, statements given with cautious optimism, and slowly, cautiously, the stock stabilized. Social media chatter shifted from whispers of scandal to tentative approval. Headlines now spoke of corporate reform rather than family betrayal. Meanwhile, the personal fallout, my relationship, mine with them, changed too. Not dramatically, not theatrically, not like the explosive confrontation at the anniversary dinner that had defined the early weeks. This was quieter, more subtle, less polished, more honest. A recalibration of expectations, boundaries, and unspoken understanding. I stopped chasing their approval. I stopped waiting for the inevitable critique, the inevitable comparison. Gone were the days of internalizing every word of disappointment. I no longer measured my worth through the prism of their standards. And they stopped mocking my unconventional path. It was a slow realization. The sarcasm, the subtle eye rolls, the sighs that used to follow any mention of my career, my projects, my choices, all had softened. Their comments, once sharp to cut through steel, now fell flat, and I noticed it not because of anything they said, but because I no longer carried their judgment like a chain around my neck. One evening the phone rang, the screen lit up. His name, my father. I paused, hesitated. A part of me expected the old voice, the cold, calculating, judgmental tone that had followed me through life. But it wasn't that, not this time. "Hello?" My voice steady, cautious, wary. "How are you?" His words were simple, almost casual. No critique, no boasting, no condescension. Just genuine inquiry, a question that had never existed in our history. I paused again, processed it. The simplicity of the question felt revolutionary, small, fragile, but monumental. "I'm good," I said finally, "better than ever, not because of him, not because of them, but because of the autonomy I had reclaimed, the life I had carved on my terms."
He didn't respond immediately, just silence, the kind that hums with unspoken thoughts. Then a soft, almost hesitant, "That's good to hear." I hung up and stared at the ceiling. The weight of decades of control, of subtle emotional warfare, lifted imperceptibly. The relief wasn't dramatic, but profound. The quiet acknowledgement that I had survived, thrived, and transformed their expectations was more satisfying than any confrontation. Flashback. I remembered the anniversary dinner, crystal chandeliers flickering above the ballroom, the forced laughter, the golden cake, their public humiliation. Every snide comment, every sly glance, every whispered joke at my expense now felt like distant echoes. Back then, the humiliation had burned, sharp, piercing, but it had also ignited something, a quiet, relentless fire. The realization that the only path to freedom wasn't pleading, wasn't arguing, it was walking away, calculating, and letting truth do the work. Back in the present, I sat in my apartment overlooking the city lights. The skyline shimmered with possibility, reflecting the transformation not only in the corporate empire, but also within the family dynamic. I could feel it, subtle, pervasive, a shift in energy. Not submission, not domination, just equilibrium. Respect, however grudging, was earned. I thought of my mother, the woman who had spent decades shaping perception, controlling narrative, crafting appearances. I remembered her voice the night we met privately. "We underestimated you." Not a threat, not praise, just acknowledgement. Something I had craved but never expected. And my father, the man whose very presence had loomed like a shadow over every decision of my youth, whose cold logic had silenced my ambitions for years, now spoke simply, "How are you?" Not to command, not to manipulate, but to connect. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about recognition. Boundaries had shifted. Power had redistributed, and the quiet beauty of that realization was almost cinematic in its subtlety. I thought back to the months following my public exposure of the company's hidden irregularities, the sleepless nights drafting reports, organizing data, ensuring nothing could be misconstrued or twisted, the moral weight of responsibility pressing on me with every click of the keyboard, every spreadsheet, every document shared publicly. It was terrifying, exhilarating, liberating. I had known the risks, but I had calculated, prepared, and executed. And in that calculated execution, I realized something essential. Change doesn't always come from confrontation. Change doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from stepping away, from refusing to shrink, from letting truth illuminate the darkness that others fear to enter. Months passed, the company stabilized, public trust cautiously rebuilt, and in tandem, the relationships within the family stabilized, not as they were, but as they should have been. Honest, vulnerable, unvarnished. The polished veneers were gone, the masks removed, and what remained was raw, fragile, and beautiful in its authenticity. I remembered my own transformation, the internal shift from feeling like a perpetual disappointment to embracing the role of catalyst, the courage it took to expose not just the corporate malpractices, but the personal failures, the hypocrisies, the inherited patterns of control. That courage had changed the narrative, for the company, for the family, and for myself. Even small gestures now carried weight. A neutral conversation, a respectful acknowledgement, a simple phone call. The world outside the apartment moved in its chaotic rhythm, oblivious to these subtle victories, but inside, the revolution had already occurred. Walking away had been the first step, speaking truth had been the second, watching as their empire, their pride, and their sense of control recalibrated under transparency had been the third, and finally, witnessing the small human shift in them, just enough to allow connection, understanding, and growth, was the last, most profound step. I sat back, hands resting lightly on the table, the city lights casting shadows that danced across the walls. The humiliation they had inflicted, the control they had wielded, and the power they had misused, all of it had become irrelevant, not forgotten, but transformed into lessons, into strength, into clarity. The future stretched ahead, luminous and uncertain, and in that light, I realized something undeniable. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the family disappointment. I wasn't defined by their standards, their expectations, or their judgment. I was the catalyst, the force that had forced truth into the open, the one who had demonstrated that integrity, courage, and patience could shift even the most rigid empires. And in that quiet, in that subtle, profound shift, I finally understood the true power of walking away, of refusing to shrink, and of letting light expose the shadows. Sometimes change doesn't roar, sometimes it arrives quietly, and in that quiet, it is unstoppable. I smiled, not because of victory, but because of liberation, not because of revenge, but because of truth, not because of them, but because of me. The hum of the city below, the faint glow of office lights, the soft murmur of distant traffic, all of it became a symphony of possibility, and for the first time in my life, I felt the exhilarating, terrifying, and beautiful weight of being unshackled. The family humiliated me publicly, but what I did next didn't just expose secrets, it forced truth into the light, and in that light, I finally saw myself clearly. I wasn't the family disappointment, I was the catalyst, and that catalyst, quiet, steady, and unyielding, had changed everything.